Town sent a starving servant to muck his stables, but the Comanche said, "Eat first. You're shaking." Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The morning sun had barely risen over the small, dust-ridden town nestled at the edge of the frontier. Clara, a young servant girl, stood at the entrance of the barn, her stomach gnawing with hunger. She was thin, her clothes tattered, her hands shaking as she held the shovel she'd been given to muck the stables. The town had sent her here, not out of kindness, but because no one else would do the dirty work. She had no choice. The town was tough, and so was she, or at least, that's what she told herself. But today, something felt different. The wind carried a chill that cut through her ragged dress as she slowly made her way inside the barn. The smell of hay and manure was overwhelming, but it was nothing compared to the hunger she felt deep in her bones. She had been sent to work, but there was no food for her. The town knew she was starving, but it didn't matter. She was just another tool, another servant to be used until she was no longer needed. She dropped to her knees, scraping the muck away from the stables, her hands trembling from exhaustion. Her breath came in shallow gasps as the cold seeped into her skin. Just when she thought she couldn't go on, a deep voice broke through the silence. "Eat first. You're shaking." Clara froze, her heart pounding. She looked up, startled, to find a tall figure standing in the doorway. His dark eyes regarded her with an intensity that made her feel both small and seen. He was a Comanche, dressed in worn leather and fur, with a long black braid hanging down his back. She hadn't heard him approach. His presence was commanding, and yet, there was something in his voice that was not harsh, but firm. She couldn't believe it. Hey, man from the tribe that had been at odds with the settlers for so long. The same tribe that had raided towns, taken captives, and lived by their own rules. Why was he here? The Comanche moved closer, holding out a small sack of dried meat and bread. "Eat," he said again, this time more gently. Clara hesitated for a moment, the hunger inside her threatening to overtake her pride. But something in his voice, in his calm demeanor, made her take the food. She accepted it reluctantly, her hands still shaking as she tore into the bread. It was dry, but it was the first real food she had eaten in days. As she chewed, she felt the warmth of the bread fill her stomach, the pain of hunger easing, even if just for a moment. She glanced up at him, still unsure of what to say. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Comanche didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but steady. "Because no one should work without food," he said. Clara felt a strange mix of gratitude and confusion. She had heard the stories of Comanche warriors, fierce and untamed, not known for their kindness. And yet, here he was, offering her something she hadn't expected, compassion. As she finished the bread, she looked down at her hands, which were still trembling, but now for a different reason. She had been abandoned by her own people, left to suffer in the harsh world of the frontier. And yet, this stranger, a man from a tribe she had been taught to fear, had shown her a kindness that no one else had. It was a moment that would change her life forever, one small act of mercy in a world that often seemed devoid of it. "Thank you," she said quietly, looking up at him. The Comanche nodded once, his gaze softening for the first time. "I do not do this for thanks," he replied, his voice calm, "but because it is right." With that, he turned and disappeared into the shadows of the barn, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts, and a new sense of hope that had been sparked in her heart. For the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could survive in this unforgiving world. The Comanche's unexpected kindness lingered in Clara's thoughts as she stood in the barn, the weight of his words settling in her mind. The food had given her strength, but more importantly, it had ignited a spark of something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, not everyone in this harsh world saw her as less than human. The moment was fleeting, however, as she knew her work was far from done. She still had the stables to muck, the hay to collect, and the animals to care for. But as she turned back to her chores, the presence of the Comanche lingered like a shadow. It was as though his quiet strength had imprinted itself on the very air around her, filling the barn with a calm she had never known before. Clara worked with a renewed sense of purpose, the food in her belly giving her the energy to move faster, to work harder, to prove to herself that she could survive this life. Yet, even as she toiled, she couldn't shake the feeling that her encounter with the stranger had changed something deep within her. She wasn't sure what, but there was a flicker of something, like a door had cracked open that had been locked shut for far too long. The sound of footsteps broke her from her thoughts. She turned to see the Comanche returning, his eyes scanning the barn with the same calm intensity. Without a word, he moved toward her, his gaze sharp as he observed her progress. Clara felt her heart race as he stepped closer, unsure of what he wanted, or if he would judge her for her work. To her surprise, he said nothing about the state of the barn. Instead, he moved to one of the stalls, where a restless horse stood pawing at the ground. Without hesitation, he began to calm the animal, speaking softly to it in a language Clara didn't understand. The horse seemed to relax under his touch, its body settling into a more peaceful stance. Clara watched, fascinated by the way the Comanche interacted with the animal. It was as if he had a quiet command over the world around him. He had been nothing but kind to her, and yet he carried himself with a powerful presence that demanded respect. It was a strange mix of warmth and strength, a combination Clara had never encountered before. As he worked with the horse, Clara felt a sudden urge to help, to do something more than just shovel muck. She wasn't sure where it came from, but the desire to prove herself, to show him that she was capable, surged within her. She picked up a rake and moved toward another stall, quietly trying to help. The Comanche's gaze flicked toward her for a moment, but he said nothing. Clara wasn't sure if he was testing her, or if he was simply waiting for her to figure things out on her own. Either way, she was determined not to disappoint him. As they worked in silence, the minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The storm outside had passed, but Clara could still hear the faint sound of wind rustling through the trees, a constant reminder of the unforgiving nature of the world around them. Yet, in the barn, there was a strange peace. It wasn't the peace of comfort, but the kind that came from surviving a storm together. At one point, the Comanche spoke, his voice low and steady. "You work hard," he said, his words simple but meaningful. Clara paused, unsure of how to respond. She had never been praised for her efforts before, at least not in a way that felt sincere. Most of the time, people simply expected her to do the work, never acknowledging how hard it was, or how much it drained her. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. The Comanche gave a small nod, his gaze softening for a brief moment before he returned to his work. Clara continued to rake the hay, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. It wasn't much, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was more than just a servant. She was someone who had earned respect, not through force or fear, but through simple hard work and the willingness to survive. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, casting a golden light through the barn doors, Clara found herself sitting on a bale of hay, looking out into the open field. She was exhausted, but there was a quiet satisfaction in her bones. She had survived another day, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like she had something to look forward to. The Comanche came to sit beside her, the quiet between them comfortable. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, after a long pause, the Comanche finally broke the silence. "You're not like the others," he said, his words catching Clara off guard. She turned to him, meeting his gaze. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. The Comanche looked out at the horizon, his expression unreadable. "Most people," he said slowly, "would have given up by now. But you keep going." Clara felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't realized until now how much she had been holding on, how much she had been fighting to survive. It had always been about survival, about getting through the next day. But in that moment, she realized that perhaps, just perhaps, it could be about something more. Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The Comanche stood up, offering her a hand. "Come," he said. "It's time for you to rest." Clara hesitated for a moment, then took his hand. As she stood, she felt a shift inside her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could face it. The days that followed were filled with a quiet rhythm. Clara had settled into a routine at the barn, her work becoming more manageable with the strength the Comanche had helped restore in her. She felt the weight of her previous exhaustion begin to lift, replaced by a newfound determination. The barn, once a place of hard labor, now felt like a sanctuary, a place where she could breathe without the constant dread that had shadowed her every move in the past. Despite the warmth of the barn and the peace that came with her daily tasks, there was still something stirring within her, a sense of unfinished business, a question she couldn't shake. Why had the Comanche helped her? Why had he been so kind when so many others had ignored her? One evening, after the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara sat on the edge of a hay bale, her hands resting in her lap. The barn was quiet, the only sound the occasional rustle of hay as the animals shifted in their stalls. The Comanche, as usual, was nearby, tending to the animals. With the same quiet precision, Clara watched him for a moment, the curiosity growing in her chest. She had never really spoken to him about his past, his life. He had saved her, fed her, even offered her protection, but there was still so much she didn't know. Finally, unable to resist the question any longer, Clara stood up and approached him. He was in the middle of brushing down a horse, the animal's dark coat gleaming in the fading light. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to phrase her thoughts. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. The Comanche paused, his hand stilling on the horse's mane. He didn't immediately respond, instead taking a deep breath, as though contemplating how best to answer. Clara felt the weight of the silence settle between them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "I see strength in you," he said, his voice calm and steady. "More than most. You've survived much." Clara was taken aback by his words. Strength? All she had ever known was struggle, surviving each day as best as she could. But to him, she was strong. His words touched something deep inside her, something she hadn't realized was there, an ember of pride, perhaps, or recognition of her own resilience. "But you didn't have to help me," she said, her voice a little firmer now. "I could have kept working, just like I always have." The Comanche turned to face her fully, his gaze intense, yet not unkind. "You were starving," he said simply, as if that alone were reason enough. Clara blinked, taken aback. No one had ever cared enough to offer help when she was in need, let alone without asking for something in return. "I've known hunger," he continued, his voice quiet but carrying a depth of experience. "It's not something anyone should face alone." His words hit Clara harder than she expected. The vulnerability she had hidden for so long bubbled to the surface. She had always been taught to keep going, to never show weakness, to endure, no matter the cost. But here, in this barn, in the presence of this quiet warrior, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Someone cared. The Comanche returned to his work, but Clara stayed where she was, her mind racing. With the implications of his words. Why had he chosen her, of all people? He wasn't like the other men she had encountered in the frontier. There was no selfishness in him, no ulterior motive. He acted out of a sense of duty, or perhaps something deeper, compassion. Days passed, and the bond between Clara and the Comanche deepened. They didn't speak often, but when they did, it was always meaningful. He taught her how to handle the animals with more confidence, showing her how to calm a nervous horse or feed a stubborn mule. In return, Clara helped him with the chores, working side by side in a quiet understanding. As the seasons changed, Clara found herself becoming more than just a servant. She was someone who was learning, growing, and finding strength she never knew she had. But there were still moments of doubt. One evening, as Clara sat by the fire, the Comanche approached her with something in his hand, an intricately carved wooden necklace. He held it out to her, his eyes not meeting hers. "For protection," he said simply. Clara looked at the necklace, unsure of how to respond. It was beautiful, the wood smooth and polished, the carvings intricate and personal. She reached out tentatively and accepted it, her fingers brushing against his. "Thank you," she whispered, the weight of the gesture settling in her chest. The Comanche nodded, his eyes softening for just a moment. Clara had no words to express what she was feeling. She hadn't expected kindness, let alone this. As she looked at the necklace in her hands, she realized something. This was more than just an offering of protection. It was a symbol of trust, of a connection between two people who had both known hardship. And in that moment, Clara understood that she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. She had a place here. With him. Days passed, and Clara's life began to change in ways she could never have imagined. The weather grew colder as autumn gave way to the sharp winds of winter, and with the change in seasons, Clara found herself working even more closely with the Comanche. The work in the barn had grown easier, the chores now a routine, and Clara no longer felt the bone-deep exhaustion she had once known. She had begun to heal, not just physically but emotionally, from the harshness of the past. The Comanche, as quiet and mysterious as ever, had become more than just her protector. He had become a presence in her life, one she had never expected but desperately needed. The bond between them was unspoken but deep, built on mutual respect and the unlikeliest of friendships. Clara often found herself reflecting on the days before she had met him, when she had been lost and alone. She had not known who she was meant to be, wandering in a world that seemed determined to crush her spirit. But now, with him by her side, she felt stronger. Not in a way that made her feel invincible, but in a way that made her believe that, no matter the odds, she could stand up and face whatever came. One evening, as the wind howled outside and the storm clouds gathered in the distance, Clara sat by the fire, her fingers tracing the smooth wood of the necklace the Comanche had given her. The warmth from the fire did little to soothe the restlessness that had begun to settle in her chest. The sense of safety she had felt in the barn was starting to slip away, replaced by a growing anxiety. She didn't know what it was, but something had changed in her. The quiet days had been comforting, but now Clara felt like she was standing on the edge of something, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. As she stared into the fire, lost in thought, the Comanche appeared, his presence like a shadow in the dimly lit room. He seemed to sense her unease before she even spoke. "You are troubled," he said, his voice steady as always, though there was a note of concern hidden within it. Clara didn't look up at first. She was still unsure of how to voice the swirling thoughts in her head. "I'm not sure what to do next," she confessed, her voice soft. "I've been here for so long, and I feel like there's something I'm supposed to do, something more, but I don't know what it is." The Comanche sat down beside her, his eyes never leaving her face. "You have come far," he said. "What you do next is not for others to decide. It is for you to discover." His words were simple, yet they carried a weight that Clara couldn't quite grasp. It was as though he was trying to show her a path that was not immediately clear, a path that she would have to walk on her own. The fire crackled between them, the warmth of the flames dancing in the silence. Clara let out a breath, feeling a slight weight lift from her chest. Maybe the answers didn't need to be so clear right now. Maybe she didn't need to know everything at once. Slowly, she allowed herself to relax. The tension in her shoulders eased, and for the first time in weeks, she felt at peace with the uncertainty that had been plaguing her. The storm outside grew louder, and the wind howled against the walls of the barn, but inside, there was a sense of calm. The Comanche had given her the space to breathe, and in that moment, Clara understood that sometimes, the only thing one needed to do was trust in the unknown. The following days passed in a blur of quiet conversations and simple tasks. The Comanche continued to care for the horses, tending to them with the same careful attention he had always shown. Clara, now more confident, took on more responsibility, helping him in ways she hadn't dared before. She wasn't just working for survival anymore. She was building something with him, something that felt solid and real. The connection between them grew stronger, and though they never spoke of it, there was a shift in the air, a subtle but undeniable understanding that they were no longer strangers. One morning, as Clara worked in the barn, she heard the distant sound of hooves approaching. She looked up, a feeling of unease sweeping over her. It was the first time in weeks that anyone had come to the barn, and her first instinct was to hide, to retreat into the familiar silence of the Comanche's presence. But before she could even make a decision, the Comanche stepped forward, his hand resting on his knife. "Stay," he said quietly, his gaze focused on the horizon where the riders could be seen approaching. Clara froze, her heart racing. She knew who they were. The riders were the very people who had abandoned her in the first place, the ones who had cast her aside without a second thought. As the riders grew closer, Clara felt a rush of emotions flood her: fear, anger, and confusion. She had no idea what they wanted, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't the same girl who had been cast aside so easily. The Comanche moved to stand beside her, his presence like a shield, ready to protect her from whatever came next. When the riders finally reached the barn, they slowed their horses and regarded Clara with cold, disinterested eyes. The leader, a burly man with a scar across his cheek, looked her over with contempt. "We came to collect what's ours," he growled, his voice rough with disdain. Clara felt a surge of defiance rise within her. She wasn't going back. Not to them. Not ever again. Before she could speak, the Comanche stepped forward, his stance unwavering. "She is not yours to take," he said, his voice low and commanding. The tension in the air thickened, and Clara held her breath. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew that whatever it was, she wasn't alone anymore. The tension in the barn was palpable, thickening the air as Clara stood next to the Comanche. The riders had not yet dismounted, but their presence alone seemed to hang like a storm on the horizon. The leader's eyes locked onto Clara, his gaze sharp and dismissive, as if she were nothing more than a piece of property to be reclaimed. Clara's heart raced, and a flood of emotions surged within her: fear, anger, and a strange sense of power that she hadn't known she possessed. She had been used, abandoned, and cast aside by these people before, but now, standing beside the Comanche, she felt a fire within her that refused to be extinguished. The Comanche stood tall and steady, his hand never straying far from the knife at his side. His silent strength radiated from him, a presence that made the riders hesitate, just for a moment. The leader cleared his throat, his expression souring as he looked the Comanche up and down. "We came for the girl," he spat, his voice low and threatening. "She's a part of the town's debt. She belongs to us." Clara felt a surge of defiance. She wasn't a debt to be paid off or an object to be claimed. She was a person. The Comanche didn't flinch. His gaze remained steady, unwavering. "She is not yours to take," he said calmly, his voice carrying an unspoken promise of protection. The leader's eyes narrowed. He didn't take kindly to being defied, but the Comanche's presence was enough to make him second-guess his next move. "We've got a right to take her back," the man said, his tone now tinged with annoyance. "You don't know who you're messing with." The Comanche took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving the man's face. "You're in my land now," he said quietly, "and you will leave, or you will regret it." The silence in the barn grew thick again, only the sound of the wind outside and the occasional shift of an animal breaking the heavy stillness. Clara could hardly breathe, unsure of what was going to happen next. The leader exchanged a look with his men, and for a moment, Clara thought they might just walk away. But then the leader grunted, a rough laugh escaping his lips. "You think you can intimidate me?" he sneered. "You're nothing but a savage." His hand went to his holstered pistol, but before he could draw, the Comanche moved with a speed that Clara couldn't follow. In a flash, the knife was in his hand, held steady at the leader's throat. The riders froze, eyes wide with surprise. The Comanche's movements were fluid, precise, and yet there was no sense of anger in his actions, just the quiet power of someone who knew exactly what he was capable of. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen him move like that before. The leader's hand trembled, his fingers hovering over the gun, but he didn't dare draw it. The Comanche's knife didn't waver. "I said, you will leave," the Comanche repeated, his voice soft but unwavering. Now, the leader, realizing he was at a disadvantage, looked to his men. He gave them a short nod, signaling for them to back off. "Fine," he muttered, his voice thick with frustration. "We'll leave, for now." The men slowly backed away, mounting their horses with hesitant movements. The leader shot one last venomous glance at Clara, as though she were the one who had betrayed him. But Clara stood tall, her chest rising and falling with the rhythm of her breath, feeling a surge of pride she hadn't known was possible. As the riders turned and rode off, disappearing into the distance, Clara felt the weight of her past, the fear and helplessness, start to lift. She was not the same person who had once been cast aside. She was stronger now, and she had the Comanche to thank for that. He had protected her when no one else would, not out of obligation, but because he saw her as more than just a servant. He had seen her strength. As the last of the riders disappeared over the horizon, Clara turned to the Comanche. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. The Comanche nodded, sheathing his knife with a quiet, deliberate movement. "You do not need to thank me," he said. "You are no longer their servant. You are free." Clara's heart swelled with emotion. She had always believed that freedom was something she had to fight for, but now she understood that it wasn't just about survival. It was about finding the courage to stand up for herself, to demand the respect that she deserved. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she truly belonged, not to anyone, but to herself. The Comanche turned to walk away, his footsteps soft on the dirt floor of the barn. Clara stood still for a moment, her heart racing, before she followed him. She was no longer just surviving. She was living. And with the Comanche at her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. The days following the confrontation with the riders passed in a strange quiet. The barn, once a place of quiet dread, now felt more like a home to Clara. She had come to appreciate the stillness that enveloped her, the sound of the wind whistling through the cracks in the walls, and the soft shuffle of hooves in the stalls. With each passing day, she grew more confident in her work, tending to the horses and cleaning the barn with a newfound sense of pride. The Comanche remained by her side, ever watchful, but there was a quiet shift between them. He no longer merely watched her from a distance, but seemed to be guiding her, teaching her, as though he were preparing her for something beyond the daily chores they completed together. She often caught him watching her with a thoughtful expression, his gaze sharp, yet not unkind. He rarely spoke, but when he did, it was always with purpose, like a man who measured his words carefully. Clara found herself eager to understand him better, to know what had driven him to help her, to protect her when no one else had. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows over the barn, Clara approached him. He was standing by the horse trough, his hands working the brush over the coat of a bay horse. "Why did you help me?" Clara asked, her voice soft but steady. The Comanche paused in his work, his eyes flicking up to meet hers. For a long moment, he said nothing, and Clara wondered if he would even answer her. But then, as if deciding she had earned the right to know, he spoke. "I helped you because you did not deserve what they had done to you," he said quietly, his voice low but steady. Clara felt a strange mix of emotions stir within her at his words, gratitude, confusion, and a growing sense of something she could not name. "But I'm just a servant," she said, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "A servant with no family, no purpose, no value to them. I don't belong anywhere." The Comanche set the brush down gently, his hands moving with the kind of care that spoke to years of experience. He turned to her fully, his gaze unwavering. "That is what they wanted you to believe," he said. "That is not who you are." Clara's chest tightened, the weight of his words settling in. She had never thought of herself as anything more than what others saw her to be, someone who was used and discarded when no longer useful. But the way the Comanche looked at her, the way he spoke to her, made her feel like maybe there was more to her than what she had been led to believe. "You are not a servant," he continued, his voice steady. "You are a person, a strong one. You have survived much, and you will survive more." Clara swallowed, trying to hold back the emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. She had been so alone, for so long, that the idea of being more than what she had been taught to believe about herself was almost too much to comprehend. "But I don't know where I belong," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The Comanche's gaze softened, and he stepped closer to her. He reached out, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You belong where you choose to stand," he said. Clara looked up at him, his words sinking deep into her heart. She had never felt like she had the power to choose before. She had always been told what her place was, where she belonged, and who she was. But now, with him standing beside her, she felt like she could make her own choice. The silence between them stretched, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It was a quiet understanding, a shared moment where words were no longer needed. The barn, with its hay-covered floor and quiet animals, no longer felt like a cage, but a place of refuge. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt something stir inside her, a sense of possibility, of hope. She wasn't just a servant. She was something more. She could be something more. As the night began to fall, Clara and the Comanche worked side by side, the tasks flowing easily between them. The wind outside had died down, and the stars began to emerge, twinkling like distant promises. It felt as though the world had grown just a little bit smaller, a little bit more manageable. Clara no longer felt as if she was trapped in a story written by others. She was starting to write her own. The days blurred into one another, each filled with work, but now the work felt different. It felt like she was building something with purpose. The Comanche was always there, a steady presence at her side, guiding her without ever demanding anything in return. He never asked for her gratitude, never expected anything from her. His actions spoke louder than words, and for Clara, that was enough. She was beginning to understand the true meaning of strength, not the kind that came from physical power, but the kind that came from within, from choosing to stand tall, even when the world seemed determined to knock her down. One evening, as they finished their work for the day, Clara looked out at the horizon, the setting sun casting a golden light over the land. It was beautiful, this quiet life they were building together, and for the first time, Clara felt at peace. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone anymore. And that was enough. As Clara stood in the barn that evening, a deep sense of calm settled over her. It had been several months since the confrontation with the riders, and with each passing day, she felt a little less like the frightened, discarded servant she once was, and more like someone who belonged, someone with purpose. The Comanche's steady presence beside her, his quiet strength, had become the foundation upon which she built her new life. Yet despite the peace she had found in this new chapter, something tugged at her. The world beyond the barn, the frontier that had once seemed so hostile and alien, was still out there, and Clara knew that sooner or later, she would have to face it. She had spent too many years hiding, too many years believing she had no future, but now, there was a part of her that was beginning to wonder what might lie beyond the shelter of the barn doors. She had learned much from the Comanche, about strength, survival, and quiet resilience, but she had also learned about herself. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, and living meant more than simply existing in the safety of the barn. It meant taking control of her own destiny. One morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Clara was out in the fields, her hands working the soil. She had spent the better part of the morning tending to the small garden she had started near the barn. It was a modest thing, but it was hers. The Comanche had shown her how to tend to the land, how to coax life from the soil with the same patience and care that he showed when working with the animals. As she knelt by the rows of vegetables, Clara felt the weight of her thoughts pulling at her. The barn, the work, and even the peace she had found here. It was all good, but it wasn't enough anymore. She wanted more. She needed more. She wasn't sure what that more was, but she knew she had to find it. The Comanche approached her as she stood up, wiping the dirt from her hands. His presence was as steady as ever, his face unreadable as usual. But Clara had come to understand him in ways no one else ever had. He didn't need to say much for her to know what he was thinking. He didn't need to speak to offer his protection or his guidance. It was in the way he moved, in the way he watched over her without ever asking for anything in return. "I have been thinking," Clara said, her voice steady, but her heart racing. "About the future." The Comanche raised an eyebrow, the faintest hint of curiosity in his gaze. "What future?" he asked, his voice as calm and grounded as ever. Clara felt a surge of emotion. The question was simple, but it held so much weight. What future? That was the question she had been asking herself for so long. She had never been given the chance to choose, never been allowed to dream of anything more than mere survival. But now, with him beside her, she felt like maybe she could start thinking about what might be next. "I can't stay here forever," she said softly. "I've been hiding, but I don't want to hide anymore. I want to do something, make something of myself. I don't know what yet, but I can't keep living this small, safe life." The Comanche studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable, but something in his eyes softened. "You are right," he said, his words quiet but firm. "You are stronger than this. You are more than just a servant, more than just a survivor. You have the power to change your life, but you must choose to step forward." Clara felt a lump in her throat as she looked at him, the weight of his words sinking deep. She had always believed that her fate was something determined by others, that her future was written for her. But here, in this moment, standing in the fields with the Comanche, she realized that she had the power to change it. She wasn't bound by the past anymore. She wasn't defined by the people who had abandoned her. But I don't know where to go from here, she admitted, the fear creeping back into her voice. I don't know what path to take. The Comanche stepped closer, his presence reassuring. No one knows, he said. The path is never clear, but it is yours to find. You do not have to go alone. Clara felt a rush of gratitude. She had never thought of herself as someone with the strength to forge her own path, but with him by her side, she felt like she could face whatever came next. She didn't have to know the future. She didn't have to have all the answers. All she had to do was keep moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, Clara believed that she could. Over the next few days, Clara continued to work alongside the Comanche, but her thoughts were consumed with the idea of leaving the barn behind. She didn't know where she would go or what she would do, but the thought of staying in the same place forever felt suffocating. One evening, as the sky turned dark and the first stars appeared overhead, Clara found herself standing by the barn door, looking out into the vast, open land. The world seemed endless, full of possibilities and uncertainty. But for the first time, she felt ready to face it. The Comanche stood beside her, his quiet strength a comforting presence. He didn't ask her to stay or to leave. He simply stood with her, allowing her to make her own choice. Tomorrow, Clara said softly, her voice filled with determination, I'm going to leave. I don't know where I'll go, but I know I have to take the first step. The Comanche turned to her, his expression unreadable. But when he spoke, his voice was steady, and Clara could hear the pride in his words. Then go, and may you find the path you seek. Clara smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle in her chest. The future was uncertain, but she was no longer afraid of it. With the Comanche's blessing, she knew that whatever came next, she was ready to face it. The morning Clara had decided to leave arrived sooner than expected. The sun had barely risen over the horizon, casting a pale orange glow over the fields as she packed her meager belongings into a small, worn leather bag. Her heart raced with both anticipation and uncertainty. The barn that had been her refuge for so long now felt like a place she had outgrown, a place she had to leave behind if she ever wanted to find the life she truly sought. The Comanche had been quiet the night before, watching her as she made her preparations, offering no words of advice, only silent support. He had been her protector, her guide, and now, it seemed, he would be the one to set her free. She had been working beside him for months, learning from him in ways she had never imagined. He had given her strength when she thought she had none left. But now, it was her turn to take that strength and use it to carve out her own path. As she stood by the barn door, the leather strap of her bag in hand, the Comanche stepped out from the shadows. His presence, though always steady and quiet, seemed different this morning. There was something in his eyes, an unspoken acknowledgement that this moment, this departure, was a turning point. Clara met his gaze, her heart pounding. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady despite the nerves that twisted in her stomach. The Comanche nodded slowly, his expression unreadable as always, but there was something about the way he stood that made Clara feel like she was not alone in this. The world outside is vast, he said, his voice soft but firm. But you are not without guidance. You have learned much. You will find your way. His words, simple as they were, filled Clara with a quiet confidence she hadn't expected. She had feared the unknown, the vast world beyond the barn, but now she felt a strange peace. She wasn't stepping into the unknown alone. The lessons she had learned from the Comanche, the strength he had shown her, would be her guide. Thank you, she said softly, though the words felt inadequate for everything he had done for her. The Comanche gave her a brief, almost imperceptible nod. Go with honor, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. Clara took a deep breath, then stepped out of the barn, her feet feeling lighter with each step. The vast open land stretched out before her, the morning air crisp and cool against her skin. She had no clear direction, no map to follow, but for the first time, she didn't feel lost. The freedom she had longed for was now within her reach. She walked for miles that day, the rhythm of her footsteps steady as she put distance between herself and the barn. The world seemed larger than she had ever imagined, and yet, there was a certain comfort in it. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving. She was choosing her own path. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Clara found herself at the edge of a small town. The buildings were simple, their wooden frames weathered by time, and the town appeared to be in the middle of its evening routine. Clara paused for a moment, considering her options. She could continue on, following the winding path of the desert, or she could stop, rest, and take the chance to mingle with the people in this town. She chose to rest, finding a quiet spot near a small inn. As she entered, the warmth of the fire in the hearth greeted her, and the smell of freshly baked bread filled the air. She had not realized how much she had missed simple comforts like these until now. The innkeeper, an older woman with a kindly smile, welcomed her without question. Clara felt a sense of relief wash over her as she took a seat by the fire. The weight of her journey lightened for the moment. As the evening passed, Clara found herself speaking with the innkeeper, telling her little about her past, just enough to make her feel like she was part of something again. The woman, seeing the weariness in Clara's eyes, offered her a bed for the night. Clara accepted gratefully, knowing that the next day would bring new challenges. As she lay in the bed later that night, the quiet hum of the town outside lulled her into a deep sleep. She hadn't realized how exhausted she was until the warmth of the blankets enveloped her. Dreams of the Comanche and the lessons he had taught her filled her sleep, and for the first time in a long time, Clara slept soundly, free of the weight of uncertainty that had once hung over her. The next morning, Clara woke with a sense of clarity. She had spent so much of her life fighting to survive, trying to make it through each day, that she had never allowed herself the space to dream. But now, with the freedom she had fought for, the possibilities seemed endless. She had a future, one she could shape with her own hands. As she stepped out of the inn and into the morning sun, Clara felt a new sense of purpose. She wasn't just walking into the unknown anymore. She was walking toward something, toward a life that was hers to create. The path ahead was still unclear, but with each step she took, Clara knew she was no longer afraid of the future. She had the strength to face whatever came next. The days in the small town passed with a quiet rhythm. Clara found herself settling into a new life, one where she was no longer at the mercy of others, but in control of her own fate. The town was simple, the people kind but distant. She learned to navigate the rhythms of daily life, helping the innkeeper with small chores, taking in the quiet solitude of the surrounding land, and making small connections with the locals. Yet, as comfortable as her life had become, a restless part of her remained. She had come to this town seeking freedom, but now, standing at the threshold of something new, she began to wonder if this was all she was meant to do. The freedom she had fought for, the freedom to choose her path, was beginning to feel too small, too contained. One evening, after the last of the inn's patrons had gone to bed, Clara sat by the fire in the common room, the warmth from the flames casting a soft glow over the wooden walls. She had grown used to the quiet, but tonight, it felt different. She felt the weight of her own thoughts pressing down on her, thoughts of the life she had left behind, of the Comanche, and of what she was truly seeking. Her mind often wandered back to him, to the lessons he had given her, to the strength he had seen in her when she could not see it herself. The memory of his quiet words, "You are more than just a servant. You are a person, a strong one," echoed in her mind. It was a kindness that had shaped her in ways she could not fully understand yet. But now, sitting in the dimly lit room, Clara realized that she wasn't just running from her past anymore. She was running from something else. She was running from the fear of being stuck, of never becoming more than what others had told her she was. And that fear was growing inside her, like a shadow that stretched longer each day. The thought of staying here, in this small town, working day by day without any real purpose, filled her with a sense of suffocation. She wasn't meant to just survive. She was meant to live, to find something greater. She had a strength inside her now that she hadn't known existed before, and it was time to see where it could take her. The decision to leave the town was not an easy one, but it felt necessary. The life she had once known, the life that had been dictated by others, was gone. Now, it was time for Clara to decide what she truly wanted. Early the next morning, before the town had stirred, Clara packed her few belongings into the leather bag the Comanche had helped her fill all those months ago. She took one last look at the small room she had called home for the last few weeks. The warmth of the fire in the hearth, the soft creak of the wooden floors. It had been a refuge, but now it was a reminder of the life she had left behind. As she stepped out into the cool morning air, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, Clara felt a surge of excitement in her chest. She wasn't sure where she was going, but she knew that she couldn't stay here any longer. There was a world beyond the town, a world she had yet to discover, and it was waiting for her. Clara made her way to the edge of town, her steps sure, the path ahead unclear but filled with endless possibilities. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she felt ready to face it. As she walked, her thoughts drifted back to the Comanche. She hadn't spoken to him in months, but his teachings, his quiet strength, had stayed with her. She knew that if she ever needed him, he would be there, a steady presence in her life, even from a distance. But she couldn't let herself rely on him forever. She had to find her own path now. She had to become the person he had believed her to be. As she moved further from the town, the land around her seemed to stretch out endlessly, the hills rolling toward the horizon. She felt small in the face of it, but she also felt a part of something much larger. The wind whispered through the trees, and for the first time, Clara heard the world speaking to her, urging her to keep going, to keep moving forward. The road ahead was long, and Clara didn't know where it would lead. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. She knew that she had the strength to face whatever came her way. As the sun climbed higher, Clara walked on, her heart filled with a sense of purpose she had never known before. She was no longer running. She was moving toward something, toward a life she had chosen for herself, a life that was hers to shape. And for the first time in a long time, Clara felt like she was truly free. Clara had been walking for days, the landscape around her stretching endlessly, with nothing but the distant mountains to guide her. The path ahead was uncertain, but she felt something within her shifting, as though with each step she was shedding the remnants of the life she had left behind. She had chosen this journey, this new chapter, but the deeper she ventured, the more she realized the weight of her decision. The freedom she had longed for now came with the weight of responsibility, of making choices, of defining who she was going to become. Despite the doubts that crept into her thoughts at times, she knew that there was no turning back. One evening, after a long day of travel, Clara found herself at the edge of a small town. It was nothing like the place she had left behind. The buildings were few, simple wooden structures with worn shingles, and a few houses scattered along the dirt road. It looked quiet, but there was a sense of life about it, a community that, at least from a distance, seemed peaceful. She approached cautiously, unsure of how to enter or if she should even stay. The townspeople went about their business, unaware of the stranger who had just arrived. Clara hesitated at the edge of the town, her heart racing. She had come so far, and yet, the thought of interacting with strangers, of having to explain herself again, made her stomach churn. It felt easier to simply keep walking, to leave this place behind before it had the chance to challenge her. But she knew she couldn't keep running forever. She had to step forward, take the risks that came with freedom. Clara gathered her courage and walked into the heart of the town. The few townsfolk who glanced her way did so without suspicion, their gazes neutral but polite. She kept her head down, not making eye contact, unsure of what to expect, but ready for whatever came. She made her way to a small tavern near the center of the town, the dim lights spilling out from the open door. Inside, the warm glow of the hearth beckoned, and the smell of roasted meat and bread filled the air. Clara stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. It was a modest place, with rough-hewn tables and chairs, but there was a sense of comfort here, a stark contrast to the long, solitary journey she had been on. The innkeeper, a middle-aged woman with a kind smile, looked up from behind the counter as Clara approached. "Can I help you, miss?" she asked, her voice friendly but cautious, as though she was sizing up the stranger in front of her. Clara hesitated, her throat tightening with the question she had not yet asked herself. "I'm just passing through," she said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I could use a meal and a place to rest for the night." The innkeeper nodded without question, showing her to a small table by the window. Clara sat down, her hands trembling as she placed her bag beside her. The woman quickly brought over a bowl of soup and a loaf of warm bread. Clara didn't realize how hungry she was until the first bite of food hit her tongue. She devoured the meal in silence, the warmth of the food settling into her empty stomach, grounding her in the moment. As she ate, she noticed the innkeeper watching her from behind the counter. After a moment, The woman spoke again. "You're not from around here, are you?" she asked, her tone more curious than accusatory. Clara looked up, meeting her gaze for the first time. "No," she replied quietly. "I've been traveling alone for some time." The innkeeper seemed to study her for a moment before nodding. "It's rare we get travelers here," she said, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "People around here don't ask many questions. But if you're looking for work, there's always something to be done in these parts. The land's hard, but we manage." Clara felt a flicker of hope rise within her. Work. A place to belong. It wasn't much, but it was more than she had expected when she first stepped into the town. "I'm not sure what I'm looking for," Clara admitted, her voice almost hesitant. "I just know I need to keep moving. I can't stay in one place for too long." The innkeeper's expression softened. "I understand," she said, her tone kind. "Sometimes we all need to keep moving to find what we're looking for. Just remember, no matter where you go, you don't have to do it alone." Clara felt the weight of her words sink in. It had been so long since anyone had said anything like that to her, and for a moment, she allowed herself to believe it. Believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be alone in this world. As the evening wore on and the tavern began to fill with locals returning from their daily tasks, Clara sat by the fire, her thoughts quiet but not unsettled. She had come to this place with no expectations, only a desire to keep moving forward. And yet, for the first time in a long while, she felt as though she had found a moment of peace, a place where she could be herself, not the servant of others, but a person in her own right. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be more challenges, more choices to make. But for now, in this quiet town, Clara realized that she had taken another step toward the life she had always wanted, a life where she was in control of her own destiny. As the fire crackled in the hearth and the laughter of the townsfolk filled the air, Clara smiled to herself. She was not alone anymore, and that was all she needed to begin the next chapter of her journey. Days turned into weeks, and Clara found herself growing more comfortable in the small town. She had settled into a routine that, though simple, gave her a sense of stability she had never experienced before. She helped the innkeeper with the daily chores, learned the rhythms of the local community, and slowly began to make connections with the people. But even with the comfort of the town, something deep within Clara urged her to keep moving forward. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had only reached the beginning of her journey. The warmth of the fire and the sound of the town's evening bustle were soothing, but Clara often found herself gazing at the horizon, wondering what lay beyond. One crisp morning, as she worked outside the inn, gathering firewood for the coming winter, a familiar figure appeared on the outskirts of town. Clara stopped, her heart skipping a beat as she recognized the tall, steady figure. It was the Comanche. He had appeared without warning, as if he had never truly left, though he had given her the space to find her way. He was standing at the edge of the town, watching her with a quiet intensity, his gaze soft but unwavering. Clara's breath caught in her throat. The last time she had seen him, she had been unsure of what her future held. But now, seeing him again, she realized how much she had grown, how much she had changed. She was no longer the girl who had been abandoned and afraid. She was stronger now, shaped by the lessons he had taught her, ready to face whatever the future held. As the Comanche walked toward her, his footsteps slow and deliberate, Clara found herself smiling. He had been the one to help her believe in herself, to see the strength she had never known was there. "You have done well," he said, his voice as steady as ever, but there was something softer in his tone, as if he had seen her growth. Clara nodded, unsure of what to say, but grateful for the recognition. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've learned so much, not just from you, but from myself." The Comanche studied her for a moment, his gaze sharp as always, but with a hint of something else in his eyes, pride, perhaps, or maybe something deeper. "You are ready now," he said simply, his words carrying a weight Clara couldn't ignore. "Ready for what?" Clara asked, her heart racing. She had thought about leaving the town many times, but the uncertainty of the future had always held her back. The comfort of the town, the warmth of the innkeeper's kindness, made it hard to let go. But standing here now, in front of the Comanche, Clara felt like she had outgrown this place. She had already begun to forge her own path, but something deep within her told her that the time had come to take the next step. The Comanche smiled, his expression softening. "Ready to choose your path, wherever it leads," he said, his words gentle but firm. "The road ahead will not always be easy, but you are no longer running from yourself. You have the strength to face what comes next." Clara felt a rush of emotions flood through her. Fear, excitement, uncertainty, and an overwhelming sense of possibility. She had spent so much of her life running from her past, from the people who had abandoned her. But now, with the Comanche's words echoing in her mind, she realized she wasn't running anymore. She was choosing her own destiny. The Comanche reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch a reassuring presence. "Remember, the journey is yours to make," he said softly. "You will never be alone in this world. You have the strength within you to walk any path you choose." Clara nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She had never imagined this moment, this feeling of strength and possibility. She had been so focused on surviving, on getting by, that she had never allowed herself to think about what it meant to truly live. Now, with the Comanche's guidance and her newfound confidence, Clara knew that she could face whatever came next. She didn't know where the road would take her, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. As the Comanche turned to leave, Clara watched him go, feeling a sense of peace settle in her chest. He had been the catalyst for her transformation, the person who had shown her the strength she had always carried within herself. But now, it was her turn to walk her own path, to face her own challenges, and to shape her own future. The town had given her a sense of stability, but it was time for Clara to move beyond it. She had a journey to complete, and she was ready to take the first step. As the sun dipped low in the sky, Clara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision lift from her shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, but with each step she took, she knew she was no longer the frightened, abandoned girl who had walked into the barn all those months ago. She was someone new, someone stronger. And whatever lay ahead, she was ready to face it. Clara woke to the sound of birds singing in the trees outside the small cabin she had rented for the night. The warmth of the early morning sun seeped through the thin curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. She stretched, feeling the ache in her muscles from the long journey. It had been several weeks since she had left the small town, and each day had brought its own set of challenges, but also moments of clarity. She was no longer just drifting. She had a purpose now, even if she didn't fully understand what that purpose was yet. As she packed her belongings, Clara's thoughts wandered back to the Comanche. She hadn't seen him since that day outside the town, but his words still echoed in her mind. "You have the strength to face what comes next." It was something she had needed to hear, something that had sparked something deep inside her. She wasn't running anymore. She was choosing, and that, more than anything, made all the difference. The road ahead was still uncertain. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving forward. She couldn't go back to the life she had known before. There was no safety in that anymore, no comfort in remaining in the shadows of a past that no longer defined her. Clara had spent too many years letting others dictate who she was, and now, she was determined to carve her own path. The town she had stayed in was behind her, a place that had offered a brief respite, but she knew it wasn't her home. As much as she had found peace there, she knew it was only a temporary stop. The world was vast, and the choices were endless. There was a town ahead, a place she had heard about from some travelers she had met on the road, a place where people from all walks of life came together to trade, to survive. It was a bustling town, filled with opportunity, but also danger. Clara wasn't sure if she was ready for what lay there, but she knew that she couldn't turn back now. She had to go. She packed her things quickly, tying the leather straps of her bag tightly, then stepped out into the fresh morning air. The road stretched out before her, the dirt path winding through the trees, leading toward the unknown. With each step she took, Clara felt the weight of the past lifting off her shoulders. The fear, the uncertainty, the constant questioning of her worth, it was all fading away. She was no longer the girl who had wandered the frontier, lost and alone. She was someone new, someone stronger. The journey was not easy. The road was long, and the terrain was rough. Clara pushed forward, walking for hours, her feet sore and her body aching. But she didn't stop. Not once. She had learned to push through, to keep moving even when it felt like the world was working against her. She was no longer afraid of the challenges ahead. She knew they were inevitable. but she also knew she was capable of facing them. As the sun began to set, Clara reached the outskirts of the town. She paused for a moment, taking in the sight of the buildings that loomed ahead. This was it, the place where her next chapter would begin. The town was busy, the streets crowded with people going about their business. Merchants shouted from their stalls, offering goods for sale. Horses clopped along the cobblestone streets, pulling carts filled with supplies. The smell of roasting meat and baked bread hung in the air, a sharp contrast to the long days of travel she had endured. Clara stepped into the town, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she would step into the life she had chosen. She was no longer defined by the past, by the people who had abandoned her, or the life that had been thrust upon her. She was in control now. As she walked through the town, Clara couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision she had made. This was a place filled with strangers, and though it was bustling with life, it also carried the risks of any new beginning. People here would not know her story. They wouldn't know what she had been through, or the strength it had taken for her to get this far. And perhaps that was for the best. Clara wasn't here to dwell on her past. She was here to build her future. She paused in front of a small inn, the sign above, the door swaying gently in the breeze. It seemed as good a place as any to start. With a deep breath, Clara pushed open the door and stepped inside. The warmth of the fire hit her first, followed by the sound of murmured conversations and the clinking of glasses. The innkeeper, a woman in her 40s, looked up from behind the counter and smiled when she saw Clara. "Welcome," she said, her voice warm. "Can I help you with something?" Clara hesitated for a moment before replying. "I'm looking for a place to stay for the night," she said quietly. The innkeeper studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Of course. You look like you've had a long journey." Clara nodded, grateful for the woman's kindness. She had been traveling for days without any real rest, and the thought of a warm meal and a bed was a relief. The innkeeper led her to a small room at the back of the inn. It was simple, with a modest bed and a small window that overlooked the town square. The innkeeper left Clara alone to settle in, and as Clara unpacked her bag, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She was here. She had made it. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, Clara felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The days that followed were filled with a quiet, steady transformation for Clara. The town, with its bustling streets and friendly faces, became a place where she could finally take a breath, where she could shape a future she had only dared to dream of. The innkeeper, whose name was Mary, had become something of a mentor to Clara. She had lived in the town for years, and her knowledge of the people and the land was vast. Mary offered Clara a job at the inn, serving meals and helping with the bookkeeping. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Each day, as Clara worked alongside Mary, she learned not only about running the inn but about herself. The woman's quiet wisdom, her steady presence, reminded Clara of the strength she was learning to recognize in herself. The townspeople welcomed Clara, slowly at first, with cautious curiosity. But it wasn't long before she became a familiar face, a part of the fabric of the community. The other women in the town treated her like an equal, offering her advice, helping her with tasks, and encouraging her to take on more responsibility. They didn't know her past, and Clara was beginning to understand that it didn't matter. She had built something here, a life of her own, independent and self-sustained. As the weeks turned into months, Clara began to feel more like herself. The feelings of doubt, of being lost, had begun to fade, replaced by the certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be. The life she had once feared had become the life she had fought for, and now it was hers to live. Yet, no matter how settled she became, no matter how much she grew to love the quiet rhythm of her days, there were moments when her thoughts drifted back to the Comanche. She wondered what he was doing, where he was, and if he ever thought of her. His lessons had stayed with her, but so had his absence. It was as if he had given her the strength to walk on her own, but had remained in the shadows, a steady presence from a distance. Clara hadn't seen him since the day he had helped her, and though she didn't expect to, a part of her always hoped their paths would cross again. But life in the town went on, and Clara's focus shifted to the work at hand. She was learning to make a name for herself, not as the girl who had been abandoned or as the girl who had run, but as Clara, the woman who had carved her own place in the world. One day, As Clara was working at the inn, the door opened, and a traveler stepped in. His boots were dusty from the road, and his hat was low over his face, hiding his features. The man looked around for a moment, and when his eyes landed on Clara, he paused. The air seemed to shift in that moment, and Clara's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know why, but something in the way he looked at her made her blood run cold. And then he spoke. "Clara," he said, his voice quiet but familiar. The world seemed to stand still for a moment as Clara turned toward him, her breath catching in her throat. There was no mistaking it. The man standing before her was the Comanche. Time seemed to stretch out as Clara tried to process the sight of him. She had not seen him for so long, and now, here he was, standing in front of her as though no time had passed at all. He had changed, she could see that. His hair was longer, his clothes more worn, but the calm, steady presence that had defined him was still there. "I didn't expect to see you again," Clara said, her voice a mix of surprise and something else, something deeper, more complex. The Comanche gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I did not expect to see you here," he replied. His gaze softened for a moment, and Clara could feel the weight of the years that had passed between them. But the moment passed quickly, and the distance that had grown between them in the time they had been apart seemed to melt away. Clara felt the tension in her chest ease. "I'm glad to see you," she said quietly, her voice barely more than a whisper. The Comanche nodded, as if understanding exactly what she meant. "I have traveled far," he said, "but I see you have made a life here. A good life." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She hadn't realized how much she had needed his approval, how much she had needed to know that she was doing the right thing. "I have," she replied, her voice stronger now. "I found my place." The Comanche's eyes softened, and for a moment, they stood there in silence, each of them taking in the changes that had taken place in the other. Finally, after a long pause, the Comanche spoke again. "You have grown," he said, his voice filled with something that Clara couldn't quite place. "I knew you would." Clara smiled, a sense of pride welling up inside her. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, the words feeling truer than she had expected. The Comanche nodded, as though he understood what she meant. "You always had the strength," he said quietly. "You just had to find it." Clara took a deep breath, the weight of the past, of everything that had brought her here, settling in her chest. She had found that strength, and she had built something with it. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with gratitude. "For everything." The Comanche's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer before he nodded and turned toward the door. "You are ready now," he said softly, his voice as steady as ever. "Keep walking your path." And with that, he walked out of the inn, disappearing into the world beyond. Clara stood there for a moment, the quiet of the room settling over her. She didn't know where the Comanche was going, or where she would go from here, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She had found her way, and now, with the world stretched out before her, she was ready to take the next step.